I want to invite you for full worship tonight. It's great to see you kids in here. Let me assure you, no matter how bored you get during this sermon, that whatever else you would have done tonight would not save your life or your soul, and this might. So I'm glad you're here. I never had anybody say that to me when I was that age, so I'm excited about saying that to them. I invite you to worship fully tonight as we will have this awesome opportunity to take the Lord's Supper together. We will take a family meal together, so I invite you to prepare your hearts for that. That is not a tack on. That is a major part of what we do, and also worshipfully give in our joy box as our members know to celebrate our generous giving into God's kingdom. We have a plan to spread the Great Commission all over the world from this place. So last week we took off on the Sermon on the Mount, did the Beatitudes, all of them. If you have not seen it, I recommend that you go back and watch it, not because my work was tremendous, but just simply because God showed up and changed some hearts and souls and minds. We publish all of our sermons online, and I'm not trying to sell that you go listen to my sermons, but I do think that if you're going to understand the entire Sermon on the Mount that we're going to spend the next 13 weeks in, you need to understand God's start in that. And so let me just say this to start tonight. It is impossible, listen to me, it is impossible to live in the 8 normatives of kingdom life. That's what came at you last week, are the 8 normatives of kingdom life. They're not 8 suggestions. They are the 8 normatives of how Christians are to live inside the kingdom. Jesus has invited you to pull up a seat on the hill, on the hillside, and he's going to tell you what his kingdom's like. Instead of us going, hey, Jesus, let me define your kingdom for you. He comes and says, let me define the kingdom. And so he says, here's 8 normatives that you would see, called the Beatitudes. Now, let me say this. Those traits are internal traits in you, work that God is doing inside of you, but they only develop by your work outside of yourself. So if you hang around this church very long, you're going to see hashtag community, hashtag family, hashtag mission all the time. And what that means is that's the lab in which God develops the Beatitudes in you. That if you would like to actually walk in the way that Jesus said to walk, they can only be developed in relationship to messy, crazy, and watch her try to sign this, whack job people. I don't know what she did with that. Like just, that's where God develops you. Everybody says, I'm looking for a church with nicer, more normal people. Well, welcome, this is it. I mean, like it's the same everywhere. It's the same. We're all a mess. But all people are attracted to Beatitudes because here's what we're pretty good at as a species, not just Christians, but just as a species. We're good at looking for internal peace. If you hung around anywhere in Asia tonight, whatever form of Hindu or whatever form of Buddhism they were probably looking at tonight, it was because they're searching for an inner peace. God put that in us, that search for this sense of satisfaction, of peace. And so searching for that is natural, but we find some goofy ways to try to find that. And if you look back at your own life, the attempts that you make to find internal peace sometimes are pretty interesting. I do this once in a while, and I start making a list of the ways that God has saved me. I won't list those for you because you probably would not come back. But it's just true. And then when we find a moment of peace, here's what we want to do. We just want to stay there. Like that's what happens in church oftentimes. People get saved and they get filled with the Spirit and they feel this sense of peace. And we think, man, I feel peaceful for the first time ever. I think I'll just stay here. We want to find that the blessed are of the Beatitudes are something that we just want to keep and stay there. Go inward. Let me just live in my own little world. The only problem with that is that the Beatitudes in context drive us out. They are never just for us. They drive us out. They drive us to mission. So everything about the redemptive story of the Bible drives us out. Hashtag missionaries. God is about to tell us with 2 incredible metaphors. Listen to this closely. This is worth your night. God is about to tell you with 2 incredible metaphors that he has faith in you. Has anybody ever told you before that God has tremendous faith in you? I mean, like Like we all get taught as kids, like you got to have faith in God, you got to believe in God. Have you ever thought about that God turns that around once you're in and goes, you know what, I have faith in you? Does that seem weird? Does that strike your sensibilities as funny? We know it's important to believe in God. It's also important, let me just get this on the table for you, to believe that he believes in you. Does that change your life? That should change your life. Here we go, Matthew chapter 5. If you have a Bible, please follow along. We're going to start in verse 13. There's only 4 verses, but that doesn't mean the sermon's short. Sorry. Verse 13 says this, you are the salt of the earth. Metaphor number 1, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Jesus just called you salt. It's an interesting metaphor, huh? What does he mean? Well, part of learning to read the Bible is to think about, listen closely, everybody always said, how do you read the Bible? I want to teach me how to read the Bible. Here's one way you read the Bible. You try to figure out what that would have meant to Jesus' listeners. It's not going to make as much sense to you because we have a limited use for salt. But when he said it to them, the listeners instantly would have thought preservative. They didn't have refrigerations. And I'm going to tell you a couple of things about my trip to Israel tonight. One of them would be that while Jesus picked a pretty good place if you have to be homeless because it's never cold there, it's also warm enough that once you butchered some meat, it would spoil quickly. It would rot quickly. And so what they would do is take a freshly butchered cow and set it on a place and begin to pack it in just pounds and pounds and pounds of salt. It would keep the meat, and so a good word for that would be it was a preservative. So in other words, we didn't have to eat 29 T-bones in one sitting and puke. We would space it out now because like refrigeration, like you have, you can put it all in a freezer. We didn't have those modern conveniences. So those well-meaning pastors and Bible teachers that I had as a kid taught this like this. See if this rings with you. They would teach us, be careful, make sure that you coat yourself with preservative, because if you get around culture, they may influence you and you will rot. Well, they had the idea of salt being a preservative correct there. They had gone to seminary and they got that part right. But they didn't understand what Jesus meant in terms of who was rotting. You understand that if you're in this room tonight and you've met Jesus and you've been filled with his Spirit, you're not rotting anymore. This thing may be decaying. This tent may be decaying, but you are not rotting anymore. Your preservative is throughout and throughout and throughout. Yes? It's good news. But the world around you is rotting. The world around you is dying. Look around you. Look around you. These pastors were wrong. This passage is not about protect yourself, preserve yourself from culture. It's about go out and there are many, look around you, there are many dead corpses around you in need of preservation. You are the salt. Jesus says they need to live. The world is rotting away from the curse, and we are called to deliver the preservative. So the first big idea is this. Calling us salt is a call to mission and to influence in culture, not seclusion. If you were ever taught in your life that you are saved to seclude, you were abused spiritually, let me just get that on the table. That is called spiritual abuse. Everything about us is to engage rotting culture with the preservative of the salt. But in addition to that, when Christians get the salt call, things just get better. You understand that your neighborhood is better because you live in it, because you are salt. That's not arrogant, that's just true. There is less chance that somebody's going to be abused or tortured in your neighborhood because you live there. You understand that, right? The world is just better because you live there. You ever notice how if you walk in on somebody spitting racism or demeaning women, and they know who you are, They know that you have some essence of holiness about you because you know Jesus. Oftentimes they'll just stop. They'll just stop in their tracks out of deference for the holiness that you stand for. If that's not your situation, we need to get that figured out. Why would that not be our situation? But that is salt. We are preserving some sense of holiness in the culture just with our physical presence. We don't have to say a word. R. Kent Hughes wrote this about Christians spreading the salt of the gospel in their context on mission. Just let this soak in. He said, I believe such Christians exert an incalculable influence on society. Their mere presence reduces crime, restrains ethical corruption, promotes honesty, quickens the conscience, and elevates the general moral atmosphere. By the way, at one time, let me just interrupt that for a second. I just had a thought. At one time in this nation, Christians, true Bible-believing disciples of Jesus, made up about 50% of our population. When that was true and this was true, it was a different day. Our culture is now made up of about 2% of Bible-believing, Spirit-filled Christians. You don't think that's not a call to mission? Where we could go back where neighborhoods are mainly made up of people who can't wait to talk about Jesus. Can't wait for their kids to understand how we live in holiness rather than how we live in depravity. All right, rant over. The presence of such people in the military, in business, in education, in a fraternity or sorority will amazingly elevate the level of living. And their absence, listen to this, will allow unbelievable depths of depravity. You want to go to where the most depraved things happen in the world. In Bangkok, Thailand, there are men that fly in from all over the world to have sex with 6-year-old girls. That is because the gospel has not been present where the men are and has not been present in Bangkok ever. It is a $200 billion industry. Let that soak in for a minute. When there is no salt, that's the kind of things that show up. Dead, rotting meat throughout an entire culture creates something that looks like that. Hug your kids and be glad that they've never gotten caught in that deal. Yes? R. Kent Hughes continues, believers, salty believers, are the world's preservative. The questions we must ask ourselves is, what happens when we get to know people without Christ? Does it make a difference in their lives? Are we salt? Oftentimes I hear Christians complain about the way things are in culture and they haven't shared the gospel with their neighbor in 10 years. Well, yeah, we left rotting meat throughout our neighborhood. It's going to be bad. So stop complaining or share the gospel. So the salted church would live lives so full of something distinctively countercultural to the rot around us that folks would want what we have. Second thought, salt in Jesus' day as today was not only a preservative, but it was a spice. Salt is king at the Great Crib. Anybody else just salt the heck out of everything? I mean, like if we're broiling meat, something on the grill, it gets salt the night before, like extensive, like soak it in, like put something in there, drill some holes down in it, let it sink in and really get in there. We salt the heck out of everything. It brings zest. Everybody always says, your food tastes like it's got some zing to it. It's just salt. One reason we're so engaged with the Arts Coalition missional community here, I love what's going on there because is that we believe that Christians should bring spice and zest into every arena of life. Natalie comes up and does spoken word that has some poetry to it. Sasha right now, she's not just signing, there's some art to what she's doing. There's some picture of beauty in the way she is expressing herself and what she's doing right now. And we believe that if you write great songs, they don't have to be songs about Jesus. If you paint great pictures, you don't have to paint about the cross to reveal the glory of God. That's salt. That's salt. That's spice. It just shoots a jolt of joy through us. That's hard to say. Jolt of joy through us. Or wonder into an observer. Like you don't think that doesn't stir affections for God? I can't picture how somebody can take a chunk of marble and begin to chip away at it and it become a statue. That's a wonder. A talent given from God. I don't use gift because it's not a spiritual gift, but it is a talent given from God that expresses God. Jesus was just so smart to use this analogy. You ever, on a little different track here, do you ever notice how in like bars, they'll always give like really cheap or free food that's really salty? Why do they do that? Make you thirsty, right? Make you thirsty. That's something that's going on here. Jesus is saying, you're the salt of the earth. He's saying, you're like food at Fast Eddie's. Yeah, I mean, like some of you religious cats go in here going, I've never been there. And I would just say, if you're 21, you're a liar. Salt creates thirst. And that's what we should do with our lives. Our lives should be like that, where like Fast Eddie food, where it creates a thirst for more. That might be a weird analogy for some of you that grew up in legalistic churches, right? The Bible tells us that God made people thirsty for him. Did you know that? God made people thirsty for him. So even in the middle of their sinful depravity, there's this burning sense to locate the way back to the garden and all that is good, right, and perfect. In the Gospels, whenever anybody encountered Jesus, there was a thirst formed. Nicodemus showed up in the middle of the night. He says, I've seen you heal people. He's a Pharisee of the ruling council. He shows up in the middle of the night in John 3 and says, man, I've seen some amazing things about you. A thirst had begun to be burned in him. And then he encountered Jesus more, and the more he encountered, eventually we see Nicodemus, I think, saved at the end of the book. So my question for you is, are we salty enough? Are we full enough of the gospel to create thirst? Do people look at your lives and go, I want more of whatever that is? Then you're the salt of the earth. Jesus says, you're living in my kingdom. You're the salt of the earth. When people look at your life and say, I can't wait. We must be a full salt shaker, and we must spread the salt. This is not a call to be inward and preserve. This is a call to be outward and preserve. The passage also hints that it's possible for salt to lose its taste. What would a desalted church look like? Anybody ever been in a desalted church? There was no zest. There was no life. There was no preservative. There was no gospel. There was no flavor. This is simple. A church loses its saltiness, its flavor, its zeal when the gospel is no longer central and mission is something that's been handed over to the writing of a check. We send missionaries, you know. Or something we do for an hour on Saturday morning. Let me show you salt. There's salt. You see a dude come out of the water like that, that's salt. Can you look at that and go, I don't want what he has? Or does he just look too crazy to you conservatives? Right? That guy has had a recognition, he was saved from drugs. He has had a recognition that he was dead and rotting, and now he's alive and healed and well, and salt just came flying out of his shaker right there. See, when a church becomes practical or casual over trusting the sinless life of Jesus, you know, it showed up down here in our prayer again a little while ago. People actually make fun of our church because we talk about Jesus too much. Whoever says that's been desalted. There is no salt without the precious name of Jesus. There is no salt without his sinless life. There is no salt without his sacrificial death. There is no salt without his resurrection. There is no salt without him putting his spirit in this room and speaking to you right now. There is no salt without a thought that he's coming again and getting us out of this stinking rot. Yes? That's salt. That's what that guy's thinking about when he came out of the water. Church will become saltless and dead. And we can always run a litmus test. The city on a hill looked distinctive from culture. Is this a place of hope and zeal? Is this a place that believes the good news of Jesus can overcome any depravity? Like, do you ever look at a person in our culture and go, "That too far gone"? Yeah, too far gone. Really? You need to look at some of your leaders here. We were too far gone. Is this a place that believes that? God's ambassadors. Our people, God's ambassadors on mission. Mark Sikma came and spoke to our Soma Immerse residents. Just an amazing question he posed to us. He said, he was here doing some training. He said this, he said, "What would those around you say about Jesus based upon your life as an ambassador?" If somebody just walked with you for a day and said, "This person's becoming Christ-like," what would they say about Jesus? Well, Jesus must be angry. Jesus must be frustrated. That was me today. Jesus must be selfish. Well, Jesus must not be. You get the idea. If we're desalted, right? We're not the salt of the earth full of Jesus. They would look at us and go, "Yeah, man, I don't know, man. It looks like those things." And it would not create thirst. Being salty comes from believing the gospel. You understand that, right? Being salty comes from believing the gospel, actually believing it, walking in the Spirit, and being humbly teachable. Those three things. Those three things will save your life, kids. Believing in Jesus, believing in the gospel, walking in the Spirit, and being humbly teachable. Taking what we're talking about here tonight and doing something with it. These kids ought to go back to their schools in the fall and be salt. Be distinctive from every kid around them because they've been filled with God's Spirit. Verse 14. Here we go. This only happens once here. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. It's fun. You get to see where our name came from. Right here, Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, Matthew chapter 5. But I have a question for you. How many of you, when you heard that, visualized, it's kind of cool because this building right here kind of sets up on a hill. When people down on Jeffco, they can kind of see it. When they're over here, they can. The church building kind of sits up on a hill. That's kind of cool. It's a city on a hill. If that visualized in your head, you're not quite getting what the church is. But Jesus' Jewish listeners had to be taken aback for a second. You have to understand that every time he opened his mouth in this sermon, his listeners were astonished because he is completely redefining the kingdom from the way they had been taught as children, completely defining it correctly and as it was meant to be. And he says, this light of the world thing, right? It had to be convicting and exciting at the same time. Because you know when Jesus says he's the light of the world, you know what he was saying to his Jewish listeners? Hey, you know that light that I brought down? You guys remember Prince of Egypt or any of the Ten Commandments stories? There's a light that comes down and Pharaoh's armies can't get to the Israelites because of this giant light. And Jesus looks out at all these guys right now and he goes, hey, you know that light? That was me. Hey, you know that burn in that bush when Moses walked up on it and the voice that came out? You know that light that was in that bush, that burning bush? That was me. Hey, you know that when Elijah is calling down fire from heaven and fire came down and smoked the cow on the altar and all the wood and soaked wood? Yeah, that was me. I'm the light of the world. I'm the light of the world. Well, we might buy that one because Jesus is Jesus. Now Jesus turns to you and goes, you are the light of the world. It's you and me, wherever we are. That's both daunting and exciting, right? A little daunting. Like people should look at me and see Jesus. Oh, Lord. As I stopped in the car dealer today, with my air conditioner out for the fourth time, I thought, okay, light of the world, got to preach it tonight. Somebody fix this thing. A little daunting, a little exciting. The world is dark. Yes? Does anybody think that like this is a good place? The world is dark, and if anybody's going to see the light, see Jesus, it is going to be through us. And it's daunting because it will cost you some friends. In John chapter 3, Jesus tells us this, that everybody around you, you understand that the majority of your family prefers darkness. You understand that the majority of your friends prefer darkness. You understand that the majority of your coworkers prefer darkness. Jesus says it. He says, people are dark. They prefer darkness. Why? So that their evil deeds can be hidden. It's just who we are. And so light exposes. Why, those of you that have had bad habits in your life, did you do them like during the daytime? Like you're clowning on your wife, doing something you shouldn't be doing, and did you do it in the daytime, like in front of her? No. Because your evil deeds, you needed to be hidden. We can't bring them into the light. If you brought them into the light and she kind of liked it, that's a little weird. Just remember our light. This light that Jesus described here, by the way, is mainly reflected light. Don't get to thinking that you're the light of the world like he's the light of the world. You want a metaphor for that? He's the sun, you're the moon. He's the sun, you're the moon. But maybe a little bit more than that. Ephesians 5:8 says this, for at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. And so what that sounds like is maybe that we're just a little bit more than a mere reflection. Listen to this. We actually get to join God in his holiness. We actually get to be a partner in his divine nature. You're not a child that happens to know Jesus. You're a child of God, being made godly. That's a different status. A little mystery there. So 2 metaphors here. City on a hill. Let me just share this with you. You've never been there probably, but sometime in your life, go to Israel. And if you are arriving up on Jerusalem at night from any angle, you can see Jerusalem's lights for miles and miles and miles. It says a city on a hill cannot be hidden. Well, if we're in a dark world and a city is lit up and you can see it for many, many, many miles, it cannot be hidden. Get the metaphor. Let that sink and soak. I am heading up the hills of ascent from down in the valley, and I look up on the hill, and there's Jerusalem. What Jesus is talking about here. A shining city on a hill. It cannot be hidden. And I want you to think about this. If it was a building, there's many places in Arnold that you can't see this building. But if you would actually go out and be salt, and 150 people met Jesus and joined this movement in the next year for saturation, that means everywhere 150 people are all over the city, people are seeing the light of the world. All of a sudden you start to get the metaphor that maybe at a city on a hill can't be hidden. Are you tracking with this? Because it's like Jesus said, it's going to be better that I go because the Spirit can be everywhere. Jesus can only be one place at a time. If City on a Hill is just a building and we're going to point people to a building, there's multitudes of places in the city that it cannot be seen. But if it's people throughout every neighborhood and every workplace and every school, all of a sudden a shining city on a hill becomes a reality. And we join together with all the other Christians in our community to do such a thing. And then a lamp that lights an entire room, he talks about. They are visible. They are visible. Are you visible or invisible? Let me just put it this way for you. I'll put it on the screen. There is no such thing as an invisible believer. There is no such thing as an invisible believer. Verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. It's okay to humbly let your works be seen. But let me tell you a story about how this plays out in action. A few years ago, I was praying with a small group of disciples over this passage. We arrived on this passage and we just stopped and we said, we're not going to do anything else for the rest of the day. We're just going to pray over this passage. You should do that once in a while. You should gather with your family. You should gather with your Mr. Community partners, your DNA partners, and just take a passage like this and begin to say, God, do something in us here. Let's not leave this place before you do something in us here. And that's what we did. Well, at that time, that group is studying at the same time St. Francis County, the county to the south of us, and we were studying where all the brokenness is. And God had begun to reveal that nearly all of the brokenness in the entire county, the people who were in trouble with crime, the people who were in trouble with their marriages, the people who were in trouble at school, all of those were influenced by drug and alcohol addiction or other addictions. And you remember last week how we talked about blessed are those who mourn because they mourn the brokenness of their city? Well, as we noticed those things, it broke us. We began to mourn. Are you tracking with this? We began to mourn. We began to think about all these kids that we knew of that were all messed up because mom and dad were all messed up in drugs and alcohol. We began to mourn the fact that we would hear all these stories about all of the people who are in prison and jail because of drug and alcohol addiction. And so we had the audacity, listen to me, to ask God what he wanted. We didn't come to him and say, hey, here's all our needs. We said, hey, God, what do you want? What do you want? And it was almost audible. God spoke. He said, let your light shine out of this passage into the darkest places. He didn't say just let your light shine where you are. He said, I'm asking some of you to change your lives, change everything about your lives, and let it shine into the darkest places. My light needs to go to the darkest places, he said. And this became an interesting meeting here because I'm sitting with Meg Reiner, who's like a concert flutist. She plays the flute like nobody's business, and she's real classy. Right? I don't even know why she would sit with me in a room. Like I deserve to be in jail. And here we have Meg in all of her class. And there were other people like her in that room. And they became stirred. They became stirred. And she and her band of merry servants dug in. And I said, I'll get you whatever you need. Finances, resources. And some crazy things happened. Some crazy things happened. We began to shine the light of the gospel into the darkest places. We went into the jails. We went into 3 prisons. We went into all of probation and parole. We went into the Division of Family Services of abused children. We went into all of the darkest places of that county. What were the results? We helped to develop Conquering Addiction that you still are a part of. It's now published by Lifeway. It's called Steps. Almost 6,000 folks statewide have been involved with Conquering Addiction. 6,000. Started in 2 prisons, and the state of Missouri said, could you bring it to 3 more? Wait a minute. I don't know if you get that. Separation of church and state of Missouri said, could you bring this gospel-centered work where Jesus is the centerpiece, his name spoken about every 6 sentences, into the prisons? SEMO Behavioral Center that takes care of all addictions for Southeast Missouri. Could you bring Conquering Addictions in? And it's still going on throughout their system. Been in multiple county jails. Not me, the program. Deeply served almost 1,000 residents. Almost 1,000 residents of the Community Supervision Center that focuses on probation and parole. Nearly 1,000 people have experienced the gospel out of this prayer meeting. Has radically changed probation and parole in the whole region. They view the way they do things differently because salt and light showed up. They said everything that we do is horrific. It has no good results. Every time these people get a hold of somebody, something changes. Salt and light. One year, the bridge emptied family services. Over 20 adoptions of kids. In 1 year, we emptied family services. There were no more kids to adopt in the entire county, most of them from very difficult abuse situations and drug-infested situations. Conquering addiction is now the preferred 12-step of the Missouri Drug Court. Are you serious right now? Like judges stand up and go, yeah, you can go try that 12-step or that 12-step, but if you want some difference, take this 12-step. This one that has salt and light to it and power and authority. Take that one. Is that astonishing? State judges. Makes us hated by the other 12 steps, but there have been assassination plots against me from other entities, darkness, plots to kill me because we drove that thing. But when light pierces darkness, sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it hurts. And, oh yeah, last one. Hundreds of baptisms. Hundreds. That dude who was celebrating like some freak there a while ago, straight out of Conquering Addiction. Straight out of the program. Second big idea, the world is dark. Real dark. Read it with me. Jesus is the light of the world. Are you here? All right, let's try that again. The world is dark. It's real dark. Jesus is the light of the world. Do you believe Jesus is the light of the world? Good Lord, you just heard story after story about, you would say, well, none of those people will ever make a difference in their life. You can't help those people. They are who they are. Racism can take all kinds of forms, you know. He's challenged us to shine that light into the darkness. Let me summarize tonight for you. Number one, the world is decomposing and rotting around us. You understand that it's not getting better. Your neighbors are not getting better unless Christ is in their home. They will never get better unless Christ is in their home. The world around you is decomposing. If you have family members that you love that don't know Jesus, they are decomposing and rotting. They are not getting better. Somebody come out of drug rehab in one of our programs and they didn't know Jesus yet, but they were sober. I would say, that's awesome that you're sober. You're sober and going to hell. You're going to decompose and rot, and you'll be back in here in 6 months without Christ. It's a cycle of sin. We know it. We know it backwards and forward. We know life. That's what the Bible says. The world is decomposing and rotting, but say it with me. You are the salt of the earth. Say it, I am the salt of the earth. You want the world to change around you? Give them Jesus. Want the world to change around you? Give them Jesus. You want your family to change? Give them Jesus. You got some family marriage that's in trouble? Give them Jesus. There is no other answer. You can give them all the good advice you want. Like fix your finances, take her flowers. That's crap. Give them Jesus. And flowers. Simple truth. If you do not spread yourself around in Christ, listen to this. Your family, your community, your nation, your world will rot and die. Period. And Jesus doesn't have multiple salt sources. He's got you. He's got you. So stop waiting for others to fulfill your calling. Write that down. Number two, the world is tasteless and unsatisfying. I have tried to taste the world in every way possible. I'll just say it. The only time I've ever been satisfied in my life is in Jesus. If you got a different story, come share it with me. I want to hear it. Because I'll tell you, you got a crash and burn coming. And by the way, that could be that you got great kids, a great marriage. Yeah, I'm satisfied. I got great kids, I got a great marriage. It's going to crash and burn. The world is rotting and decomposing around you. It is tasteless. It is saltless. But you are the salt of the earth. It will not have spice and flavor if you don't bring the creative gifts that God has given you to salt it up. Number three, the world is dark and dying. You are the light of the world. Jesus didn't say, I'm the light of the world. He said, you are the light of the world. in this passage. He said, I'm the light of the world in other passages. He said, you are the light of the world. He said, I'm counting on you. I have faith in you. I believe in you. Are you excited about the fact that God Almighty, Jesus himself says, I believe in you? I didn't put together a plan B because I believe you can do this. That's maybe the most astonishing thing ever said about us by Jesus. I have no other light but you. I have no other light but you. I believe in you. I have no other light but you. And by the way, just real quick, a physics lesson. Darkness can never shove out light. If you got darkness in your life, it's because you let it in. Darkness is the absence of light. Light shoves out darkness. You shine your light, darkness goes away. Let me say it again. You shine your light, darkness goes away. Light always pierces darkness unless it's put under a shade, the passage says. Light always pushes out darkness. Listen, this is hopeful for your neighborhood, for your family, for wrecked relationships in your life. Light always pushes out darkness unless it's put under a shade. So why, if we love the humanity around us, would we put it under a shade? Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for choosing us. I have no idea why you would do so. You put the hope of the world in our hands to shine your light, but you are the hope of the world, and so we don't shine light of ourselves, we shine light of you. And so we thank you that we get to celebrate that with a family meal tonight by giving and by singing your praises. Thank you for choosing us. And we love the fact that you thought enough of us to give us reminders of how good things actually can be. So the night that you were betrayed, you took bread and you broke it. And you gave thanks and you said, this is my body which is given for you. And likewise after the supper you took the cup and you said, this is the cup of the new covenant poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. You know, there is no shining of light. There is no shining of light without the forgiveness of sins. I can't shine when I'm in dark. I can't shine when I'm in dark. So we praise you, Jesus, tonight for your bread and your blood and your forgiveness. You are good. Let us be light shiners. Let us be the salt of the earth. Amen.